often has been dropped. So it's the Hettis. Hettis are Tamil speakers. They come here and become Singalicized. So we have Hettige, Hettiarachi, we have villages called Hettipola, and so forth. They are also brought back into this huge, massive agricultural caste called Koigama or Vellama. Now we have some very interesting things. Some of the things that we are doing is we are trying to check some of the older shrines and see whether we can find the genealogies of these shrines. So one of the shrines that we are working is in the province of Uva, where the first people to institute the worship of Skanda or Murugan or Kataragama in that shrine was called two brothers, Ramanada and Mangala something or other, both brothers. As we trace the genealogy way down, in about the 4th generation, the Brahmana is a drop and the man is called Narayana Pwami, Mr. Narayana. You see, same thing. You know? So these Brahmins then were not only a very important presence, but were sort of officiants at various shrines in Sri Lanka. Now we know that Brahmanas have always been there, but not on this popular level. Brahmin priests or Purohitas were advisors to the kings. They were in charge of the royal calendar. For example, events are decided by Purohitas or the Brahmin king, Brahmin priests. So, for example, but sometimes we don't realize that one of our greatest kings, P1, Prakramabhav I, the builder of Polonnaruwa and these fantastic irrigation schemes, he was both a Buddhist and a believer in the Brahmana rites. All his birth, his eating food, were all based on Brahmanic rituals. Along with the Brahmanic rituals were also Buddhist rituals. So Buddhist monks recited Buddhist texts, Brahmanas recited Vedic texts simultaneously. Not only that, the king himself wore the sacred thread of the twice born in his thing. So we also know that, for example, P6, the great king that I first mentioned, you know, when you and I die, what will happen is, if you are Buddhist, we will have Buddhist rituals at death. But for P6, the rituals at his death were conducted by Brahmin priests, which again indicated the power and influence of Brahmins in the courts of Pandit. I have 5 minutes. He says I have 5 minutes. What do I do? So let me really sum up a little bit of this. What we then have is that this sort of distinction that we have built between Hindu and Buddhist, between Tamil and Sinhala, of course these distinctions are important. I'm not denying them. But they're also fuzzy, you see. They're also fuzzy. And we had to be careful about categorical oppositions, what are called binary distinctions, good and bad, right and wrong, left and right, all these things which we are saddled with, and the Buddhist texts are wonderful deconstructions of these binary oppositions, you see. Buddhist texts mention the importance of the in-between, the middle range, the fuzzy area, you see. So I'm suggesting that if you follow one of the great maxims of George Santayana, the Spanish philosopher, said, those who cannot remember their past are doomed to repeat it. I don't agree with that theory. If we don't know our bad side, we are doomed to repeat it. But on the other side, on the other hand, we have the good side of our history. And I think what is important for us is to recognize that good side, you see, and this is what we are trying to do in our current work. Thank you.
The audience that we have, it comes from all branches of religion. I've asked only for 20 minutes, and when we say that when there is no light, make sound. That's what we do in courts. I have some not very pleasant things to say about the way India is going. For that, I must first of all define what religion is. Not that you can define religion. Religion is practically impossible to define. So we go back to the background of religion, which is spirituality. Now, the great Swami Chinmayananda said the distinction between religion and spirituality cannot be explained except by an example, which may sound very rude sometimes. Religion is the cup of tea. You have the cup and the saucer. You have the tea inside. And you have that brilliant golden ring. I was a planter at one time and I've tasted tea. The brilliant golden ring around and even the taste of the tea. But having drunk the tea, the feeling of that you can't explain. That is spirituality. Swamiji put it slightly in a more rude way. He said, take a crystal glass of scotch. The taste of the scotch, the way the glass looks, etc., is religion. The kick of the sauce is spirituality. I said this once and some people were not at all amused. Anyway, that explains Indian spirituality. Spirituality represented a way of life. 5,000 years ago, we had a culture in our country where the emperor, dressed in all his regalia, would come down and bow before the rishi who was dressed in saffron, having nothing else but a kamandalu and a stick on which he can keep his hand. That was pure Indian spirituality. Hinduism is not a religion. It's a way of life. It's a way of life means that everything you do from morning till night onwards is nothing else but your obeisance to the divine indweller who's within you. That was the highest point of spirituality. That gave birth to the name Bharat. I'm Bharathan, if you know, so try to link both of these. Bharat means Bhava, Raga, and Tala, which are the three essentials of music. Bhava, you must have the mood. Raga, you must have, everybody knows what raga is. And Tala is the perfection of percussion. And unless these three are there, there will be no harmony. That's how even the nation was called Bharat. Please don't think that India is the name. Huh? India is the Englishman's compromise with impossibility to pronounce the real essence of Indian names. Like Uttakamand is Udaga Mandalam, which means the high place, became Uttakamand, which became the abominable Ooty. It's called Ooty now. It's terrible. This is what the English have done to modern India. Now, this attitude to spirituality necessarily meant that every type of thinking, of way of life, had to be accepted. And hence the concept of secularism as originated in the East, was born in the subcontinent. When I talk about the subcontinent, I talk about our brothers, the Pakistanis. I also talk about Ceylon and the whole of Southeast Asia. Though yesterday an attempt was made to cut it off into South Asia, I think the culture has spent throughout Southeast Asia. Now, this is the way in which we approached secularism. Secularism was not something which was completely and totally alien from our culture. Secularism did not mean keeping religion and politics apart. The concept of secularism, as understood in the Western world, was unknown in our country. For us, secularism meant tolerance, harmony, taking into account everybody's point of view and not denying anything because you don't agree with it. Now I'm coming to my first eggshell. The concept of Western secularism is totally different. I've done some research on this for this particular talk. The word secular itself was defined by a Western thinker. And as far as they were concerned, secularism means difference between the church and the state. A clear barrier was built, whereas the church could not interfere with the state could not interfere with the church. Why this is done is also explained in great detail by this thinker. He says, secularism was considered as a supporter of capitalism. Spirituality had all tolerance and all grace and all acceptance, which was not the basic creed of capitalism. Capitalism meant an aggressive approach, whereas you convince somebody, even against every belief that he has, that the product that they have to sell has to be accepted. It was an aggressive approach to a particular line of thinking which did not accommodate secularism as seen in the East. Now, these are the two basic different concepts between religion and secularism. And now we have to find out how these two can be amalgamated. And the real question before me here is how the Eisenhower Foundation can help us to do this. You have to wait till the end of my speech or till a bottle comes flying from the moderator. Now, consider what happened to India. From this high point of spirituality, everybody couldn't understand this concept. The concept rested upon 4 basics. There was no distinction between God and man, sacrilegious sometimes, to consider even towards, in some branches of Hinduism, Dvaita, you cannot conceive of God and man as one. But whereas we said, Tat Tvam Asi, this is that, without even mentioning what this is and that is, because if you mention it, it becomes circumscribed. I am Atma Brahma. My Atma is the Supreme Brahma. Then what is the Atma? Prajnanam Brahma, which meant consciousness is Brahma. Consciousness which flows through all of us in this room, throughout the world, every insect, starting from the ant right up to the elephant, or if there is anything bigger than that I have not seen. That principle is Advaita. From that, there was a sharp descent to the concept of religion. This, when I spoke at a meeting in India, several people were displeased, because for me, spirituality starts where religion ends. Religion meant the cup of tea. You had to have temples You had to have visual worship, and you had to have institutions which explain to you what you should believe. The fundamental principle of Hinduism was all these images that you read in the Puranas, etc., is based upon one basic concept, anthropomorphism. In the West, you have Karl Marx, Marxism flowing from it. Gandhi, Gandhiism flowing from it. The individual gives rise to the philosophy. But in spiritual India, a concept was taken and given a human form. The greatest of the strengths was taken and given the form of Bhima. The greatest of intellect, as well as egoism, was taken and given the form of Arjuna. Now, this anthropomorphism had its dangerous side because people forgot that these images were only representative of certain ideals. Lord Krishna is shown as blue in color. My Guru Chinmayanandaji used to say, if you ever see a blue man anywhere, rush him to the nearest hospital and give him large doses of oxygen. That sets you thinking, what is the blue of Krishna? There is nothing blue in nature. Please think. And if you do find anything, I'll give you my email. Email it to me so I'll be wiser when I talk next. There is nothing in the world which is blue except the sky and the sea. The Blue Lagoon. I can sit in my room and watch the Blue Lagoon. Why is it blue? Because it is infinite. Why is the sky blue? Because it is infinite. And the concept of infinity was given to Krishna. That is why Krishna is blue, not because he needs oxygen on an emergency basis. But what happened was, when spirituality became religion, the inner essence was lost and the cover alone was retained. People describe it as taking a banana, peeling it, throwing away the fruit and eating the banana peel. That is what happened. And along with religion came the bhakti cult, singing and dancing and music and the most beautiful temples. Temples which are so wealthy that the temple in Trivandrum of Lord Padmanabha is 45,000 crores in Indian money. Can you imagine how much that is in your money? A crore is 100 lakhs. 10 lakhs means 1 million. And double of that would be your calculation in Sri Lankan money of the treasure of the temple. When temples came, people started going to temples. I'm sorry to say the element of spirituality was lost. And that starts the era of India's spirituality vanishing and religion coming instead of having it the other way about. And the bhakti cult, I've got 5 minutes more, sir. The bhakti cult spread all over the country. Not only among the Hindus, but among the Muslims and every other creed. Bhakti was the essence. What linked the whole country together, bhakti means devotion to the Lord. Love towards the Lord is bhakti. And when we had to fight for our freedom, it became almost impossible to link the entire country together. So the genius of Gandhiji immediately conceived of touching upon this bhakti chord to unite a country as disparate as India. Can you imagine? I'm from Kerala. If I travel 200 kilometers to the north, I come to Tamil Nadu, where everything is different. The culture, the food, what we eat, what we look like, the language we speak. From there you go another 200 kilometers north and come to Karnataka. Everything is different. Like this, you go right up to Kashmir, everything is different. I don't know how many dialects we have, but it's somewhere in the hundreds. How to link this country together? Gandhiji discovered that the best way to do it was to touch upon the bhakti cult. Whether what the Mahatma did was right or wrong is not the scope of my talk. But he did this, and the whole of India became together. Remember, Adi Shankara was born in Kerala, barely 30 kilometers from where I reside. Traveled throughout India before the age of 32, establishing 4 mutts. That means he touched upon the spiritual unity and brought into effect a conglomeration of love for the Lord. Gandhiji touched upon this unifying factor, and I should not be quoted. His prayer meeting started with Vaishnava Janato Tene Kahiye. Immediately, the country split into 2 or more factors. Our Islamic brothers felt that the majority Hindu community will engulf them. Their fear was more or less justified because Gandhiji lived a life of totally being above religion. For him, it was unimportant to which religion you belong to. You should be a good man, that's all. But other people started interpreting it in a way in which the result was that the so-called minorities, which were not minorities, for a minority there must be a majority. We only had one totality. The minorities raised their hackles and said, we want to be separate, and Pakistan was born. The British jumped into the game. This was the greatest handle they could get. And in the course of negotiations, when Gandhiji wanted them to quit India, they turned around and asked him, but what about Her Majesty's Muslim subjects? You understand the cleverness of the British mind, which divided to rule. Right. My time is almost over, so I'll take 2 minutes. Now, how do we get over this? How do we bring this unity back? How will we show the Pakistanis and the other so-called minority groups that there is nothing anti-them in the core of Bharat? We have to understand that they have a cause to be afraid of, because there is a brutal majority in this country. And now we have to examine how this majority can be changed so that without a change in the religious aspect, spirituality can be brought back again. And yesterday when I was sitting through, I was amazed at Professor Atul Rahman's talk about new science, when you could see through your tongue, and when a beetle could tell you whether your Prime Minister is wearing perfume or not. That is where science has gone. Now, all this is in our mindset. My clock has already gone past 45 minutes, approaching 0. But we have young India, young Pakistan, young Ceylon, as we call it, Sri Lanka. How to instill this concept of being above destructive religion? We must fall back upon the miracles of science. At that age, from the cradle, if we can impose into their minds the basic unity of man, we have won our battle. I always conclude my speech by quoting from Tagore. Reason has not lost its way in the dreary sands of dead reason, where tireless striving stretches its arms of freedom. Let my country awake. Thank you.
by these eminent scholars experience than the mundane mornings. You are now thinking, which I think is a turn that these two eminent personalities have enabled in this session. So, right away, I will open the floor for questions that with these two speakers. So, please go ahead.
Sharnath, I'm a fellow for this year, heading to the US tonight. Question two, not being overtaken by the power of that in today's day and age. What is failing spirituality that is?
I have a little aphorism to a kind of recognition, that is what I'm trying to say, bring the past in relation to the present. And unless we also must recognize the past also has its brutalities. See? And I'm afraid some of the brutalities are more appealing to our politicians than the other side of the past that I have highlighted. So, to answer that question, in my view, is very simple. Ignorance.
A statesman is a person who thinks of the next generation. Now try to vote in more statesmen and give the power of ruling the country to them, and then your question will be answered.
Views to what has been said here. And we are talking in context of South Asia and the moon. The first is relying upon history a bit too much. History is prone to interpretations, and it can be a very dangerous game, as we have realized in South Asia. There is no right version of history, and selective interpretation of history then becomes the defining narrative in the popular discourse. It's very difficult. Blaming politicians or otherwise, they just be a representative of the will or what the popular sentiment at this time is. So we cannot assume a supernatural or super metaphysical thing and assign it to our politicians. It cannot be done. And the second one is the increasing tendency to define the nationalism in South Asian countries in terms of religion. Now that is very regressive, in my opinion. And while we can think about our spiritual past and look for hope in that, I would rather suggest that we look for the future in more scientific rationalism thing of mine. I think, Govindha Bharathan, you quoted Tagore when you closed your speech. That perhaps seemed to be a better approach for the future than relying on the past.
Everything is split into minority and majority. The Indian constitution, which is supposed to be one of the finest written constitutions in the whole world, and created in the brilliant mind of a Dalit, who, according to the caste system, which is so much spoken about, is one of the lowest. Even in such a brilliant document, the concept of a particular right or a liability is incorporated. Now, Patanjali Shastri, one of our most famous jurists, said, "Do not give the minority a sword, give them a shield where they can defend themselves." Now, that was unfortunately not done because the minorities are vote banks. And going back to my friend's earlier question, politicians are only interested in vote banks. You can never have a vote bank of spiritually minded people. For them it is too large.